Ashford Castle, Part 3. The Last Guardian. The castle disappeared into darkness. Victoria could no longer see Edward. She could no longer see her grandfather. She could no longer see the ancient figure standing behind the iron door. Only the sound of her own breathing remained. Then, a heartbeat. Thumb. Victoria froze. Another. Thumb. The sound was not coming from her chest. It was coming from beneath the castle. She turned slowly toward the iron door. A faint silver light appeared beneath it. And then a voice whispered through the darkness. Victoria. She knew that voice. It was the same voice that had called her name before the door was opened. The voice of the mirror. Victoria stepped backward. No, the darkness answered. You came looking for the truth. The silver light grew brighter. Now you must see it. Victoria closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was standing somewhere else. The castle was gone. She stood in a vast black chamber. There were no walls, no ceiling, no floor, only darkness. And in the center stood the mirror. It was enormous. Far larger than the object Margaret had described. Its surface was completely black. But it was not reflecting darkness. It was reflecting Victoria. Hundreds of Victorias. Thousands. Every version of her stood inside the mirror. Some were young. Some were old. Some wore modern clothes. Others wore dresses from centuries long past. Some were crying, some were screaming, and some were staring directly at her. Victoria whispered, "What are you?" The mirror answered, "We are what you could have been." Victoria stepped closer. "And what am I?" A woman's voice came from behind her. "You are what survived." Victoria turned. Margaret stood there, but she looked different, no longer pale, no longer transparent. She looked alive, beautiful, young, the way she must have looked before Ashford Castle took everything from her. Victoria stared at her. "You're alive." Margaret smiled sadly. "Not anymore." Victoria looked at the mirror. "Then what is this place?" Margaret walked beside her. "The place between what happened and what was meant to happen." Victoria frowned. "I don't understand." "You weren't brought here to destroy the mirror." Margaret looked at her reflection. "You were brought here to understand it." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Then tell me the truth." Margaret remained silent. "Why does the mirror show me?" "Because the mirror never creates anything." Margaret touched its black surface. "It only reveals what already exists." Victoria looked at the countless versions of herself. "Then all those women are you?" Victoria's heart began to race. "No. Yes." Margaret pointed toward one reflection. A young Victoria stood inside the mirror wearing a white dress, the same woman Victoria had seen in the highest window. "That was the first time you entered the mirror." Victoria stared. "When?" 200 years ago." Victoria shook her head. "I wasn't alive." Margaret smiled. "Not in the way you think." She stepped closer. "The Ashford bloodline was never a normal bloodline." Victoria looked at her. "What does that mean?" Margaret whispered, "Every generation produces a guardian. One woman. One soul. One life connected to the mirror." Victoria's face went pale. "And if that guardian dies?" Margaret looked at the darkness. "She returns." Victoria slowly understood. "You mean—" "Yes." Margaret touched Victoria's face. "You have lived before." A tear rolled down Victoria's cheek. "How many times?" Margaret's eyes filled with sorrow. "Too many." Victoria looked at the mirror. "And Edward?" Margaret's expression changed. "He is different." "Why?" "Because he made the one mistake no Ashford should ever make." Victoria waited. "He wished to live forever." Silence. Margaret continued. "The mirror granted his wish." Victoria whispered, But immortality was the price. No. Margaret shook her head. Immortality was not the price. Then what was? Margaret looked directly at her. Loneliness. The darkness behind them moved. A figure appeared. Edward. He stood at the edge of the chamber. Victoria immediately ran toward him. Edward! He stopped her. Don't. Victoria stared at him. Why? Because if you touch me, his voice broke. You may never leave. Victoria ignored him. She reached for his hand. Their fingers touched. The chamber exploded with light. Victoria screamed. Memories flooded into her mind. Edward standing beside Margaret. Edward discovering the mirror. Edward begging his grandfather to destroy it. Edward watching Victoria die. Again, and again, and again. Centuries passed in seconds. Victoria saw herself as a young woman, then an old woman, then a child. She saw Edward waiting, always searching for her return. She saw the Ashfords sacrificing themselves to maintain the seal. She saw Margaret choosing death rather than allowing the mirror to escape. And finally, she saw the first Ashford, the man behind the iron door. Victoria pulled her hand away. Who is he? Edward looked toward the darkness. My father. Victoria's breath caught. The first Ashford? Edward nodded. He discovered the mirror. What did he wish for? Edward looked ashamed. Everything. Victoria waited. He wanted wealth, power, an empire, and immortality. Edward's voice became colder. But the mirror gave him something else. What? The ability to see every possible future. Victoria stared at him. And that's how he survived. No. Edward looked toward the darkness. That is how he became the prisoner. The ancient figure stepped into the light. He wore the Ashford crown. His face looked almost human. Almost. His eyes were completely black. Edward. Edward stiffened. The ancient man smiled. My son. Victoria stepped forward. You're the first Ashford. The man looked at her. No. Victoria frowned. I am what remains of him. He raised one hand. The mirror began to glow. I saw every future. Every death. Every betrayal. Every ending. His eyes settled on Victoria. And in every future. You were there. Victoria felt the mark on her chest burning. Why? The ancient Ashford smiled. Because you are the guardian. Margaret stepped forward. No. The ancient man turned toward her. You failed. Margaret's expression hardened. I stopped you. For a time. The ancient Ashford looked at Victoria. But the seal was never meant to last forever. Edward moved between them. Leave her alone. The ancient man laughed. You still love her. Edward said nothing. You have loved her in every lifetime. Victoria looked at Edward. He lowered his eyes. The ancient Ashford continued. And every lifetime she dies. Victoria's heart broke. Edward whispered, I tried to change it. The ancient man smiled. And that is why you are trapped. Victoria looked at Edward. You made a wish. Yes. What did you wish for? Edward looked directly into her eyes. I wished that one day you would live. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. And you? Edward smiled. I didn't ask for myself. The mirror began to crack. A thin line appeared across its black surface. Margaret gasped. The mirror is breaking. The ancient Ashford turned. No. Another crack, then another. Victoria looked at the mirror. What is happening? Margaret answered. It has found its final guardian. Victoria understood. Me. The ancient Ashford moved toward her. You cannot destroy it. Victoria stepped backward. I don't have to. The ancient man's expression changed. What? Victoria looked at the mirror. I only have to stop feeding it. She understood the truth now. The mirror did not survive because of blood. It survived because people kept wanting. Power, love, immortality, revenge, a second chance. Every desire gave it strength. Every sacrifice fed it. Every Ashford who tried to control it became another prisoner. Victoria looked at Edward. And if no one makes another wish? Edward's eyes widened. It dies. The ancient Ashford screamed. The chamber shook violently. No! The mirror began pulling everything toward it. Margaret grabbed Victoria. Run! I can't. You must! Victoria looked at Edward. He was being pulled toward the mirror. Edward! He reached for her. Go! No! Victoria ran toward him. The ancient Ashford grabbed Edward by the throat. You belong to me. Edward struggled. I never did. The ancient man lifted him from the ground. Victoria saw the Ashford ring lying nearby. She understood. The ring was the anchor, the object that connected Edward to the mirror. She picked it up. The metal burned her hand. The mark on her chest began glowing. Margaret shouted, Victoria! Victoria held the ring over the mirror. The ancient Ashford screamed, Don't! Victoria looked at him. For 200 years, she closed her hand. You have taken enough. She dropped the ring. It struck the mirror. The entire chamber exploded. A deafening sound filled the darkness. The mirror shattered. Thousands of fragments flew through the air. Every fragment contained a memory, every sacrifice, every death, every Ashford who had ever entered the chamber. Victoria saw them all. Then, silence. The ancient Ashford fell to his knees. His crown shattered. His body began turning to dust. Edward collapsed. Victoria ran to him. Edward! He opened his eyes. For the first time in centuries, they looked completely human. He smiled. It's over. Victoria held his face. Are you free? Edward looked around. The darkness was disappearing. Yes, Victoria cried. Margaret stood behind them. She was fading. Victoria turned. Margaret. Margaret smiled. Thank you. Victoria shook her head. You saved me. Margaret answered. No. She looked at Edward. You saved each other. Victoria looked at Edward. Margaret's body became transparent. Wait. Margaret smiled one final time. Live. Then she disappeared. The chamber began collapsing. Stone fell from above. Victoria grabbed Edward's hand. We have to go. They ran. Up the ancient staircase. Through the corridor. Past the portraits. The faces inside the paintings were changing. The scratched eyes were healing. The Ashfords were finally looking forward. Not at Victoria. Not at Edward. But toward the future. Victoria and Edward reached the iron door. It was open. For the first time, there was no darkness behind it. Only morning light. They stepped through. Ashford Castle was silent. The storm had passed. Sunlight entered through the windows. Edward looked outside. I don't remember the last time I saw a sunrise. Victoria smiled. Then don't look away. They stood together as the sun rose over the castle. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Edward looked at Victoria. Do you remember? She frowned. Remember what? Us. Victoria thought about it. She remembered the chamber, the mirror, Margaret, the countless lives. But there was something else, something warm, something peaceful. She took Edward's hand. I don't remember everything. Edward looked sad. Victoria smiled. But I remember enough. He kissed her forehead. For the first time, there was no fear behind the gesture. No curse. No prophecy. No ancient bargain. Only love. Later that morning, Victoria walked through the castle alone. She entered the gallery. The portraits were different now. There were no scratched eyes. No hidden faces. No shadows. At the very end of the corridor stood Margaret's portrait. Victoria stopped. Margaret was smiling. And beside her stood a young man. Edward. But unlike the other portraits, this one had never existed before. Victoria touched the frame. A small inscription appeared beneath it. The Last Guardian. Victoria smiled through her tears. Then she noticed something. The mirror in the portrait was cracked, but not broken. Victoria stared. For a moment she thought she heard a whisper. Every ending creates a beginning. She turned. There was no one there. Only sunlight. Victoria walked away. Years later, Ashford Castle became a different place. The iron door was removed. The hidden chamber was sealed forever. The Ashford name no longer carried fear. Edward remained beside Victoria. They lived quietly, far from the secrets of the past, far from the darkness, and for the first time in generations, no Ashford died because of the castle. But sometimes late at night, Victoria would wake from a dream. In the dream, she stood before a black mirror, and someone was standing behind her. She never saw the face, only heard the voice, not threatening, not angry, almost peaceful. Some doors are meant to remain closed. Victoria would wake before sunrise. Edward would be beside her. She would take his hand, and the dream would disappear. Until one winter morning, many years later, Victoria entered the old gallery. A new portrait hung on the wall. She had never seen it before. Her heart stopped. The painting showed the castle, the same towers, the same windows, the same iron door. But in one of the highest windows stood a woman, Victoria, older, smiling. And beside her stood Edward, young, exactly as he had been the day they first met. Victoria touched the painting. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She finally understood. The mirror had not shown her the future. It had shown her the truth. Their story had never been about escaping death. It had been about choosing life. Victoria stepped away from the portrait. Outside, the sun rose over Ashford Castle. And for the first time, the castle did not feel haunted. It felt free. The wind moved gently through the halls. The candles remained still. The portraits remained silent. And somewhere deep beneath the castle, the last fragment of the black mirror turned to dust. The curse was gone. The Ashfords were free. Margaret was at peace, and Edward was finally home. Victoria smiled. Then she closed the gallery door and walked toward the light. The end.